Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The late afternoon sky hung low over Manhattan, a heavy sheet of gray that pressed against the city like a warning. Inside the upper floors of the Hale estate, the air was impossibly still. Emma stood alone in the quiet service hallway, her hands folded neatly in front of her apron, waiting for the next instruction that would inevitably arrive from the man she had worked for during the past 6 months, Alexander Hale. To the public, he was the kind of man whose name filled magazine covers and financial reports. To everyone inside this mansion, he was a force of precision, cold judgment, and immaculate control. But to Emma, who scrubbed the marble floors and arranged the silverware that gleamed under imported chandeliers, he was simply Mr. Hale, her employer, distant and unreadable. She had learned to move quietly around him. No unnecessary words, no lingering presence. Just work, finish, step back. That was the rhythm of her days. This afternoon, however, something felt different. The house was too quiet. The staff kept their heads lower than usual. Whispers floated like dust motes in the air. The wedding was only 2 days away, the wedding of Eleanor Whitford, the woman Alexander had once been engaged to before the two families tore each other apart behind velvet curtains. Emma had overheard fragments in the kitchen, words like cold invitation, media stunt, and she wants him to see it. She had tried to push the thoughts aside. She had enough to worry about already. Rent overdue, her mother's medical bills stacked in her drawer, and the simple fear of losing yet another job if she made a single mistake. But everything shifted when a door clicked behind her. "Emma," Alexander said. Just her name, calm even. But it carried the weight of something she could not quite place. She turned. He stood in the hallway, perfectly framed by the warm light of the sconces, suit immaculate, tie straight, expression carefully controlled. His eyes, however, carried a storm that did not match the rest of him. "Yes, Mr. Hale?" she asked softly. He studied her for a moment, as if measuring a decision that had already been made hours ago. Then he said, "I need you to accompany me to a wedding." Emma blinked. She must have misheard him. "A wedding, sir?" "Yes." His tone did not shift. "This Saturday." The hallway seemed to narrow around her. She cleared her throat. "You mean as staff for the event?" "No," Alexander replied. "Not as staff." A quiet pulse began in her throat. She waited, unsure whether she should breathe. "You will attend as my guest." The words landed like a tremor beneath her feet. Her mind rushed to catch up, stumbling through possibilities that made no sense. Her? A maid? Standing beside a man like him? At a wedding filled with people who belonged to a world she could barely imagine? She lowered her gaze, afraid he might see her confusion. "I do not understand why you would choose me, Mr. Hale." Alexander's jaw flexed once, just once. Enough to betray something, anger or resolve, she could not tell. "I need someone who will not become part of their spectacle," he said. "Someone outside their circles, someone who has no interest in their politics." Emma swallowed. "But why me?" There was a pause, brief, heavy. "Because I can trust you," he said. Those 4 words unnerved her more than anything else he could have said. Before she could respond, he added, "Think of it as a temporary arrangement. A contract, a role, a performance with rules she had not yet read." Emma nodded slowly, though her pulse pounded in her ears. "If that is what you need, sir, I will go." Alexander gave a single, precise nod. "Good. There are preparations to make." He turned and walked away, the echo of his footsteps stretching down the marble corridor like a promise or a warning. Emma stood frozen, breath unsteady. She had no idea that this decision would change her life, and she had no idea what the world was about to see when she stepped into that wedding at his side. Emma spent the rest of the afternoon in a quiet, suspended state. The mansion continued its usual rhythm of polished floors, hushed conversations, and distant footsteps, but her thoughts refused to settle. She kept replaying Alexander Hale's words, each one echoing with a weight she did not yet understand. Think of it as a temporary arrangement. Every time she remembered it, her chest tightened. She had never been invited anywhere by a man like him, let alone asked to stand beside him in a room full of people who lived in a world she had only seen through magazine covers left on coffee tables. She returned to the linen room to fold napkins, hoping the familiar motion would calm her. But as she lifted the soft white fabric, the door opened again. This time, it was Mrs. Dalton, the head housekeeper. Her expression carried a mixture of shock and deep, almost protective concern. "Emma," she whispered, as if the walls might be listening. "Is it true? Mr. Hale asked you to accompany him to the Whitford wedding?" Emma froze. "I suppose the staff already knows." "Of course the staff knows," Mrs. Dalton said, pressing a hand to her chest. "His former fiancée is marrying the son of a political dynasty. That event will be filled with cameras and people who look for weaknesses." Emma lowered her gaze. "I did not ask for this." "I know you did not," Mrs. Dalton replied gently. "But you must be careful. Those circles can be cruel to people who do not belong to them." Emma swallowed. "I only agreed because he asked. He said he needed someone he could trust." The older woman paused, startled by that admission. "He said that?" "Yes." Mrs. Dalton exhaled slowly, as if that single detail changed something she could not fully name. After a moment, she placed a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. "Then you must walk carefully, but with your head held high. You may be a maid, but you are not small." Emma nodded, grateful for the kindness. When she returned to her duties, she found herself more aware of her surroundings. The polished banister, the grand staircase, the portrait of the Hale family line stretching back more than a century. She felt like she was moving through someone else's story, yet somehow still expected to play a role in it. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, she made her way to the service exit. She had just reached for her coat when she turned a corner and nearly collided with Alexander himself. He stopped only inches from her. The faintest trace of surprise crossed his features. "You were leaving for the day?" "Yes, Mr. Hale." "Good." His tone shifted into something more measured. "Tomorrow, you will meet with a stylist. She will prepare what you require for the wedding." Emma's heart jolted. "A stylist, sir?" "Yes. You cannot attend the event in your usual attire. Everything will be arranged." She nodded, unable to form a better answer. He moved past her, but paused after only 2 steps. "Emma." She looked up. "Do not allow anyone to make you feel lesser than you are." For a man known for silence and restraint, those words struck deeper than he likely intended. Before she could respond, he continued down the hall, disappearing into the quiet hush of the mansion. Emma stood motionless, coat in hand, her pulse unsteady. She had no idea that the wedding would reveal more than old history. It would reveal the reason Alexander Hale needed her by his side at all. The next morning arrived with a thin layer of frost on the windows of the staff quarters. Emma woke earlier than usual, her breath unsteady as she remembered what Alexander had said. A stylist, a preparation. A world she had only observed from a distance now waited right outside her door. By 8 o'clock, she stood nervously in a quiet antechamber near the main hall, her hands clasped tightly. The mansion felt different today, as though every corridor sensed that something unusual was unfolding. When the door opened, a woman stepped inside, carrying several garment bags and a small case of cosmetics. "I am Marissa," she said warmly. "Mr. Hale asked me to take care of you for the event." Emma nodded politely. "Thank you. I have never done anything like this." Marissa smiled in a way that eased some of the tension. "Do not worry. You do not need to be someone else. You only need to allow your presence to be seen." Emma hesitated. "But I am only his maid." "Not on Saturday," Marissa replied. "For that evening you are the woman beside him." The words made Emma's chest tighten. She allowed Marissa to guide her through fabrics, colors, and subtle touches of makeup. Nothing extravagant, but everything intentional. The stylist chose a deep navy gown with a soft sheen that complemented Emma's complexion, simple jewelry, and a pair of heels that felt impossibly delicate in her hands. "You will look stunning," Marissa said as she packed up her tools. "And they will notice. They always notice when a room does not expect someone." Later that afternoon, Emma walked through the quiet halls of the Hale estate, gown protected inside a garment bag. Each step echoed a reminder of how fragile her position felt. She had always been invisible here. Now she was being asked to walk into a gathering where every eye would measure her. As she reached the base of the grand staircase, she found Alexander descending from the upper landing. His steps were measured, controlled, but his gaze locked onto the garment bag she carried. "That is your attire for Saturday?" he asked. "Yes, Mr. Hale. The stylist made the selections." He nodded once. "Good. She understands what is appropriate for the event." He paused, noticing the tension in Emma's shoulders. "Are you prepared for what you may encounter there?" Emma swallowed. "I do not think anyone can truly be prepared for a room designed to judge them." A trace of understanding flickered in Alexander's eyes. "You are correct, but remember this, you are not entering as someone beneath them. You are entering as someone chosen." The words settled around her like a steadying hand. She looked down, unsure of how to respond, but grateful for the unexpected reassurance. As Alexander continued toward his study, his voice drifted back to her. "Emma, when you stand beside me, you will not be out of place." She stood still long after he disappeared from view, her heartbeat slowly beginning to calm. For the first time, she began to wonder if the wedding was not only about his past, it might also be about the part she was unknowingly beginning to play in his future. The day before the wedding arrived with a quiet tension that threaded through every corner of the Hale estate. The staff moved carefully, speaking in low tones, aware that Alexander was meeting with several advisors in his private study. Emma kept to her duties, though her mind drifted constantly to the gown hanging in her small room, and the event that waited just hours ahead. Near midday, she was polishing the silver in the dining hall when Mrs. Dalton approached with a pair of soft gloves in her hand. "These are for tomorrow," the housekeeper said. "You will want them for the colder temperatures. The event is outdoors before the reception." Emma accepted them gently. "Thank you. I did not realize it would be outside." "That family enjoys spectacle," Mrs. Dalton replied. "They enjoy reminding others of their status." Emma hesitated. "Do you think I will embarrass Mr. Hale?" Mrs. Dalton's expression softened immediately. "No. You have a quiet dignity, Emma. That is something no amount of money can buy." The reassurance helped, but only slightly. Emma continued working until late afternoon, letting routine guide her hands. Still, her mind drifted to Alexander, wondering what drove him to bring her of all people to a wedding tied so deeply to his past. As she stepped into the hallway with a tray of polished cutlery, she nearly collided with him again. He stopped abruptly, eyes narrowing in concern. "You seem distracted," he said. She steadied the tray. "I am doing my best to stay focused, sir." "Is it the event?" he asked. "Yes, Mr. Hale. I do not wish to make mistakes." He studied her for a moment, then stepped aside so she could place the tray on a nearby table. When she turned back, he was still watching her with a focus that felt new. "You will not make mistakes," he said. "Not tomorrow and not beside me." Emma lowered her gaze. "I do not understand why you speak with such certainty." "Because I know how they operate," Alexander replied. "I know the games they play, and you are the one person in that room who will not be performing." The words pressed against something deep inside her, something she had not allowed herself to question. Before she could reply, he glanced toward the tall windows overlooking the city. "The cars will arrive at 9 in the morning," he said. "You will meet me in the entrance hall. Do not be late." "I will be there," Emma promised. Alexander nodded once, then turned away, his footsteps echoing through the corridor. She watched him go, her pulse tightening with a mixture of anxiety and something far more difficult to name. When she returned to her room that evening, she unzipped the garment bag and let her fingers trace the smooth fabric of the gown. It shimmered faintly in the lamplight, delicate yet strong, much like the part she was expected to play. Tomorrow would not simply be a wedding. It would be a stage where every unspoken truth between her and Alexander Hale would be forced into the light. Morning arrived with a crisp bite in the air, the kind that made the city feel sharper and more alert. Emma stood before the small mirror in her room, hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the fabric of the navy gown. The stylist's careful work from the previous day echoed through every detail. The gentle sweep of her hair, the subtle glow on her skin, the calm elegance that did not feel like disguise, but rather a quiet unveiling. For a moment, she hardly recognized herself. At precisely 9 o'clock, she stepped into the entrance hall. The tall windows filled the room with bright winter light, scattering across marble floors. Staff members paused discreetly as she passed, their expressions softening with a mixture of surprise and pride. Alexander Hale stood near the staircase, adjusting his cufflinks with precise movements. He wore a tailored black suit that carried the same effortless authority he always held. But when he turned and saw Emma, his hands paused. He took in the gown, the gloves, the poised stance she had practiced the night before. Something unreadable flickered across his eyes, but then his expression settled back into composed control. "You are ready," he said. "Yes, Mr. Hale." He offered his arm. "Then let us go." The car ride was quiet, filled only with the hum of the engine and the muted landscape of the city passing by. Emma kept her hands folded on her lap, willing herself to remain steady. She knew the world they were driving into would not welcome her presence. She also knew that she had agreed to walk beside a man whose past, wealth, and reputation cast long shadows. Halfway through the drive, Alexander spoke. "If anyone tries to corner you with questions, you do not need to answer. You may simply look in my direction. I will handle the rest." Emma nodded. "Thank you." He glanced toward her briefly. "You have nothing to fear." The words were quiet, but they carried a weight deeper than reassurance. As the car turned through the gates of the Whitford estate, Emma understood why. The property was enormous, sprawling across several manicured acres. White canopies stretched across the lawn, crystal arrangements glimmered in the cold morning sun, and dozens of well-dressed guests filled the space with controlled laughter. Every detail screamed prestige, legacy, and a thirst for admiration. The moment Emma stepped out of the car, a wave of silence rolled through the nearest guests. Heads turned, eyes widened, conversations faltered. They were not looking at Alexander, they were looking at her. A few whispered behind gloved hands. Some stared openly, confusion etched on their faces. Emma felt the weight of judgment settle like cold mist across her skin. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. Alexander moved to stand beside her. His presence was a shield, calm and unyielding. He offered his arm again, and when she placed her hand gently in the crook of his elbow, his voice lowered so only she could hear. "Do not shrink yourself. You belong beside me." They walked forward, their steps in perfect rhythm, cutting through the sea of whispers and narrowed eyes. For the first time, Emma realized that this was not simply a wedding to attend. It was an arena where every unspoken truth would be tested. The ceremony had not yet begun, but the gathering had already sharpened into a quiet theater of glances. Emma could feel it with every step she took beside Alexander. Conversation softened when they passed. Some guests pretended not to stare, while others let their curiosity sweep over her without restraint. Near the edge of the garden, laughter chimed from a small group dressed in deep winter tones. A woman in a silver gown, elegant and icy, turned at the sound of their approach. Her gaze locked on Alexander first, then it slid to Emma. Her smile thinned. It was Eleanor Whitford. She stepped forward, her movements measured, polished, and deliberately graceful. "Alexander," she said, her voice warm in a way that carried undertones of rehearsed sweetness. "I did not expect you to come." Alexander's expression did not shift. "You sent an invitation." "Yes," she replied, placing a hand lightly against her chest as if touched by sentiment. "But I assumed you would decline. It is not every day your former fiancé marries someone else." Emma felt the atmosphere tighten like a pulled thread. She stood still, posture composed, remembering Alexander's instruction not to shrink herself. Eleanor's eyes finally swept over Emma, pausing with unmistakable calculation. "And who is this?" she asked, her tone smooth and cool. "Forgive me, but I do not believe we have met." Before Emma could speak, Alexander answered. "This is Emma. She is my guest." The word hung between them. Guest. Not employee, not maid, a guest. Eleanor's smile cracked for a moment before she masked it with polite intrigue. "How lovely," she said. "What a unexpected choice." Her friends exchanged glances, the kind that carried silent assessments sharpened by privilege. Emma felt each one brush against her like cold air, but she stood steady. "I hope you enjoy the ceremony," Eleanor continued lightly. "It should be quite a spectacle." "Weddings often are," Alexander replied calmly. Eleanor's eyes narrowed by the smallest fraction, as if she sensed the distance in his voice. She turned away with a soft rustle of silk, her entourage following her like shadows. When she was out of earshot, Emma released a slow breath she had been holding. "You handled that well," Alexander said quietly. "I only stood there," Emma replied. "Exactly," he said. "Some people speak too much." They moved toward the seating area, where rows of white chairs lined the decorated aisle. As they approached, another couple paused to greet Alexander, but their attention drifted quickly to Emma. One of them, a man with an overly polished smile, leaned closer. "You brought someone new. How interesting. And what is her background?" His question carried a tone meant to corner her. Emma felt her throat tighten, but she remembered Alexander's instructions. She turned her gaze toward him. Alexander stepped forward before she could form a single word. "Her background," he said, "is none of your concern." The man blinked, surprised by the bluntness. Alexander's posture remained perfectly composed, but his tone left no room for further questions. Emma felt a quiet shock ripple through her. For the first time since arriving, she sensed something deeper beneath Alexander's control, an unspoken protectiveness, steady and certain. As they took their seats near the front, Emma looked toward him, trying to read the silence between them. The ceremony had not yet begun, but she could already feel it. Something was shifting, not just around them, but between them. The first notes of the string ensemble drifted across the garden, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Guests took their seats, movements soft and practiced, each person aware of the eyes surrounding them. Emma sat beside Alexander in the reserved front section, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. She could feel the weight of the moment, as if the entire event balanced on a needlepoint. Eleanor appeared at the end of the aisle in a gown that shimmered like frost under winter sunlight. Her entrance drew an immediate hush. Every head turned toward her, admiration sweeping through the crowd like a wave. But Eleanor's gaze broke from the aisle for one instant, flicking toward Alexander. The brief glance carried more meaning than any vow she was about to speak. Emma noticed the shift in her posture, the subtle tightening of Eleanor's jaw, and felt an uncomfortable pressure settle in her own chest. The ceremony unfolded with polished perfection. Vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto trembling hands. The minister spoke with gentle authority. Emma tried to focus, but her attention kept returning to the atmosphere around them. Whispers behind her, eyes darting in her direction, curiosity sharpening into something less kind. When the officiant announced the final blessing, applause spread through the crowd. Eleanor and her new husband stepped down the aisle together, smiling for the cameras positioned discreetly along the path. As the procession passed Alexander and Emma, Eleanor slowed ever so slightly. "Thank you for coming, Alexander," she said softly, her voice carrying a tone only he was meant to notice. "I hope you enjoyed the show." Alexander did not even blink. "I wish you well." Eleanor's eyes glinted with something sharp. "And your companion is interesting. I imagine the conversation between you two must be very simple." Emma felt the sting immediately, a targeted strike delivered with elegant cruelty. Her hands tensed, but before she could respond, Alexander spoke with a calm that cut deeper than anger. "You imagine many things, Eleanor," he said. "Most of them incorrect." Eleanor's smile faltered, but she continued walking, her entourage drifting with her like a drifting veil. The crowd rose to move toward the reception area, and that was when the first storm truly broke. A woman in a jeweled navy dress stepped directly into Emma's path, her expression frozen in polite disdain. "I must ask," the woman said, tilting her head, "where exactly did Alexander find you? You do not look familiar, not from any of the usual families." Emma held her breath. Before she could answer, another voice chimed in from behind, thick with mocking amusement. "She looks like someone he picked up for the evening. Maybe he wanted a little variety." A ripple of laughter followed, low and poisoned. Emma felt her cheeks burn, a mix of humiliation and outrage rising like heat beneath her skin. She tried to form a steady reply, but her throat tightened under the weight of so many staring faces. Then she felt it, Alexander's hand, resting firmly at the small of her back. When he spoke, his voice was clear enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "If any of you believe that degrading her elevates you," he said, "you are sadly mistaken. Emma stands beside me because I chose her to." Silence crashed over the crowd. The mocking smiles evaporated. The woman in the jeweled dress stepped back as if physically pushed. Emma stood still, stunned by the force of Alexander's words. For the first time, it was not only his presence that shielded her, it was his conviction. The tension from the confrontation lingered in the winter air, clinging to every corner of the Whitford estate. Emma felt her pulse still racing, the echo of cruel words ringing faintly in her ears. But Alexander's defense, calm and unwavering, had settled over her like a shield. It took her a moment to gather herself enough to step forward again. They moved toward the reception hall, passing through glass doors framed by cascading white flowers. Inside, chandeliers scattered warm light over crystal tables, and the air carried the scent of winter roses. A string ensemble played softly in the background. It should have been beautiful, but Emma could feel the eyes returning to her, drawn not only by curiosity, but by the memory of Alexander's public declaration. She wondered if she should apologize, or thank him, or simply remain silent. Her heart beat harder when he leaned slightly toward her. "Do not let them change your posture," he said quietly. "They thrive on insecurity." Emma nodded. "I am trying, Mr. Hale." He paused, then corrected gently. "Alexander. For tonight, you may call me Alexander." The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that unsettled her. Before she could respond, a loud clink rang from the head table. Eleanor stood beside her new husband, raising a crystal glass with practiced elegance. "Everyone," she announced, "before we begin, I want to thank you for sharing this beautiful moment with us." Her gaze drifted across the room until it found Alexander and Emma. A thin smile curved her lips. "And I see we have some unexpected guests this evening. Alexander, it is wonderful that you could join us. I hope your companion is enjoying herself." A quiet wave of murmurs swept through the room. Emma felt her hands tighten around the small clutch she carried. Eleanor's tone was polite, but the intention behind it was unmistakable. Alexander responded with a steady nod. "We are well, thank you." But Eleanor was not finished. "I must say," she continued, her voice sweet with false warmth, "it takes a bold heart to step into a room like this one, especially for someone who is new to our world." The whisper of insult was so thin that it barely registered as a blade, yet it cut all the same. Several guests exchanged looks, waiting to see how Emma would react. Emma drew a slow breath, remembering Marissa's words. "You do not need to be someone else. You only need to allow your presence to be seen." She lifted her chin slightly. "Thank you for the warm welcome," she said, her voice steady. "I imagine every guest here has stepped into a new world at some point in their life." Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. Emma continued gently, "Today must be a new world for you as well. New beginnings often are." A quiet hush spread across the table. It was not a challenge. It was truth spoken with dignity, and dignity was something that even power recognized. Eleanor's smile wavered. For the first time that day, her confidence cracked. Alexander's gaze shifted toward Emma, and beneath the surface of his composed expression, something softened, something almost proud. The guests resumed their chatter, but now the air felt different. Not lighter, but clearer, as if Emma had stepped out of the shadow they tried to place her in. As the reception continued, Alexander leaned close enough that only she could hear him. "That was well said," he murmured. "You did not need me to speak for you." Emma lowered her eyes. "I did not want to create trouble." "You created the opposite," he said. "You revealed truth." She felt warmth rise to her cheeks, but this time it was not from humiliation. It was from the realization that something between them had shifted again, quietly, undeniably. The night was not over yet, but the balance of the room had already begun to tilt, and Emma was no longer standing in it as a maid. She was standing as someone seen. The reception stretched on with speeches, polite laughter, and the quiet rustle of designer fabrics sweeping across the polished floor. Yet for Emma, everything felt strangely distant, as if she were watching the event through a soft veil. The sting of Eleanor's words had faded, replaced by something steadier, something that did not feel like fear anymore. She stood beside Alexander near a tall arrangement of winter roses, her posture poised, her breath even. She no longer felt the countless eyes on her. She had grown used to them. Instead, she watched Alexander, noticing the subtle signs of tension that lingered in his jaw and shoulders. He had protected her, but she realized now that she had protected him too. A few guests approached to make quiet conversation. This time, their greetings were restrained, tinged with a respect they had not shown earlier. Emma responded with calm politeness, never overstepping, never shrinking. When the music softened into a slow instrumental piece, Alexander turned toward her. "Would you like to step outside for a moment?" he asked. Emma nodded, grateful for the suggestion. They moved through the side doors that opened onto a dimly lit terrace overlooking the snowy gardens. The cold air greeted them immediately, crisp and clean, washing away the lingering weight of the reception hall. Emma pulled her gloves tighter around her fingers. "It is beautiful out here." "Yes," Alexander said softly. "It is." She looked up at him, sensing something different beneath his composed exterior. His gaze was distant but not cold, more reflective, as if he were measuring the cost of everything the night had brought to the surface. "You did well today," he said. Emma shook her head gently. "I only tried to stay calm." "That is more than many people inside that room were capable of," he replied. A quiet moment passed between them, the kind of moment that revealed truth without requiring words. Snow began to fall in delicate flakes, catching the terrace lights as they drifted down. Emma spoke carefully. "Mr. Hale, I still do not understand why you chose me for this role." Alexander turned fully toward her now, his expression clear in the cold light. "Because you do not play games, Emma. You do not hide your intentions behind power, wealth, or ambition. You stand exactly as you are. That is something rare in my world." Emma felt her chest tighten. "But I am a maid." "You are more than your position," Alexander said, his voice measured and certain. "And tonight, everyone saw that." For a moment, she could not speak. The air around them seemed to grow still, the snowfall softening the world into silence. Alexander continued, "I brought you because I trusted you to be genuine, but I did not expect that you would remind me of something I had forgotten." "What is that?" "That dignity does not depend on status," he said, "and that honesty is worth standing beside." Emma lowered her gaze, overwhelmed by the sincerity she heard in his voice. But before she could form a reply, the terrace doors opened. Eleanor stepped out, expression flawless yet strained. "Alexander," she said, "may I speak with you alone?" Alexander did not move. "Anything you need to say can be said here." Eleanor hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "Very well. I wanted to apologize. I should not have spoken to your guests the way I did." And her gaze flicked toward Emma with forced grace. "Congratulations. You handled the evening better than I expected." Emma nodded politely. "Thank you." Eleanor turned to leave, but Alexander's voice stopped her. "Eleanor," he said, "you and I ended long before tonight. I hope your future is peaceful, but do not mistake the past for unfinished feelings." Her expression tightened, then she disappeared back inside, her heels tapping sharply against the tile. Emma looked up at him. "You did not need to defend me again." "Yes," Alexander replied. "I did." They stood in silence under the falling snow, the distant music muffled by the terrace doors. When Alexander offered his arm again, the gesture felt different. Not a contract, not an arrangement, but a choice. "Shall we go?" he asked. Emma placed her hand gently in the crook of his elbow. "Yes." As they walked back into the warm glow of the reception